This House is now in session.
Are these? Okay.
And we got a few first readings. We have a few first readings today.
We don't have any minute. You don't have any minutes? Of
Minutes of the meeting held Friday, 26 October 2018 and Tuesday, 6 November 2018.
Good morning, sir. I beg to move that the minutes of the proceedings of the Honourable House of Assembly at its meeting of Friday, the 26th of October 2018 and the 6th of November, Tuesday 2018, which have been circulated, be taken as read.
If there are no corrections or observations, then let those minutes stand confirmed.
Announcements by Your Honour the Speaker.
I wish to acknowledge the presence of the British High Commissioner, Mrs. Janet Douglas, Deputy High Commissioner, Mr. Craig Fulton, the Head of Political and Communications Team, Mr. Edward Munn, and the Political Officer, Mrs. Gilly Mezzane. I trust that you will find this debate enthralling.
This is from Her Excellency the Governor General. Petitions, papers.
Mr. Speaker, I am commanded to lay the following. On behalf of the Honourable Prime Minister and Minister of Finance, Economic Affairs and Investment, the Barbados Deposit Insurance Corporation Annual Report 2017, the Securities Chelsea Sabrano Exemption Order 2018, the Securities Christopher Walcott Exemption Order 2018, Saving Bonds Amendment Regulations 2018, the Local Loans Amendment Regulations 2018, the Loan Contract Number 4656/OC/BA between the Government of Barbados and the Inter-American Development Bank on the Macroeconomic Emergency Program to protect the economic and social progress, 18th of November 2018. The Government of Barbados and Sandals Resorts International 2000 Limited Investment Incentives Agreement dated 25th of October 2013. The Government of Barbados and Sandals Resorts International 2000 Limited and Lux B.B. Property Holdings Limited and Beaches Management Barbados Limited on the Investment Incentives Agreement dated 31st of July 2014. Document in the name of the Leader of the Honourable House of Assembly, the Telecommunications Amateur Radio Regulations 2018, and document in the name of the Honourable Member of Parliament for St. James Central, the Minister of Tourism and International Transport, Barbados Conference Services Limited, financial statements for the year ended 31st of March 2017. beg to give notice of the following bills: the Income Tax Amendment and Validation Bill 2018 and the Fuel Tax Bill 2018.
Notices of questions, reports from select committees, first readings of bills. Eddie?
Back to this one.
First reading of the two bills.
These two. Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that the Income Tax Amendment and Validation Bill 2018 and the Fuel Tax Bill 2018 be now read a first time.
Question is that these bills be read a first time. All those honourable members in favor, please say aye. Aye. All those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it.
Statements by ministers, congratulatory and/or obituary speeches, personal explanations, motions for leave of absence, oral replies to questions, notices of motions for the adjournment of the House on matters of urgent public importance, orders of the day.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that standing orders numbers 6, 16, 18, 20, 42, 5, 43 and 44 be suspended for the remainder of the day's sitting.
Question is that the aforementioned standing orders be suspended for the remainder of the day's sitting. All those honourable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it. Government business is now the order of the day.
In the name of the Honourable Minister of Housing, Lands and Rural Development, to resume the debate on the passing of a resolution to approve, in accordance with Section 5 of the Crown Lands Vesting and Disposal Act, Chapter 225, the vesting in the National Housing Corporation of a parcel of land, the property of the Crown, situate at Cloughs in the parish of St. Lucie in this island for the Sites and Service Project.
The honourable member for St. Michael South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir. I want to begin by supporting this resolution and commending the Honourable Minister of Housing. And I think before we begin, Mr. Speaker, sir, that we need to have a conversation before we speak to Cloughs generally about housing policy in Barbados. And housing policy largely is bigger than the idea of just building a couple of houses. It is really about the action of a government, including legislation, program delivery, whether directly or indirectly, and the impact that it may have on housing standards in this country. Sir, we have witnessed, in my mind, over the last few years, an incomplete understanding of housing policy and other social policies. But I know that the new Minister of Housing is working on creating a housing policy, sir, that makes sense for this country. We cannot, as a government, take on the old housing policy, if indeed there was such a policy. We have to think forward and to think about the kind of Barbados that we wish to build that would suit the needs of the new Barbados that we envision. A country that we keep saying, sir, must be fit for purpose. And indeed, sir, that is our intention here through this resolution and through the other areas that we would bring to this honourable chamber. But housing is one of those things, sir, that cannot be a discrete practice. Mr. Speaker, sir, you know that if you're attempting to build a house, you have to go through the financial services. You may have to go to a bank. Some of us who are not of means, many of us may have to turn to a credit union. You know, when you're building a house, there is construction, there's upheaval. You got to dig the land. You cannot do a housing policy discreetly. And housing takes time. And because of that kind of dislocation sometimes that you may cause people, sir, there are social consequences. And in fact, sir, housing policy has been known to have political consequences too. and that we have to think very carefully and we have to think very thoroughly about how we intend to move forward as a government with our housing policy. And do we want to create an enabling environment through housing? Or do we want to continue with this kind of approach whereby people who would like to be involved in the decision-making process and who would like to be masters of their own fate do not have the opportunity to do so in this country? But I came, sir, a long time ago to the conclusion that housing is fundamentally a private transaction between two people. And I say so having been raised in government housing, that invariably it's really a private transaction between two people, even where it is the case between the person living in the house and paying the rent to the government. I understand, sir, that when a person is given a house in Barbados, a rental unit, a person is expected to pay the rent. And if you enter into an agreement to do a mortgage, then the person is expected to pay the mortgage too. But I am more than aware, sir, that in this country we now have a new phenomenon creeping in, where because we expect people to pay their rent or their mortgage, people are offering very, in my mind, conditions that are below what is acceptable Barbadian standard and charging people some unreasonable rents. And I have seen it now, sir, time and time again. Like you, Mr. Speaker, sir, I spend my life in social policy. And we've had occasion to visit homes of people who are renting rooms because rooms have now become part of the Barbadian conversation. It wasn't before. And people are being offered rooms that are below the standard for anybody to live in and being asked to pay exorbitant rents. And the moment, God forbid, that you should determine that you want to go and make a complaint, the landlord threatens you and asks you to leave his or her property. So it is almost now like there is an underground cartel governing the way people live in Barbados. People taking houses that should really accommodate one person and trying to put in 10 and 15 and asking people to share one kitchen or asking people to share one bathroom. It is not right. And then I watched, sir, while I was in the social services sector, young children having to live in these conditions and being exposed to these adult things that they should not see, but impossible not to see because of the conditions that they live in. Housing may be, in most people's mind, about wood or bricks and mortar, but it has deeper social implications. And as a government, we must be cognizant of these social implications whenever we attempt to implement a housing solution or consider revising our housing policy, Mr. Speaker, sir. And sir, I feel the same now as we talk about this purchase of land and what we intend to do with it. That as we talk about these things, we have to be cognizant of all the associated issues and start to build a new and revived Barbados. I find it almost unacceptable in many ways, sir, that in the last few years, while we were living in housing units, the government made a policy of transferring the housing units to the people who lived in the houses, the former government. And many of those housing units were in a state of desperate disrepair and needed windows fixed and toilets fixed, and the sanitary conditions were not up to scratch. And they transferred the houses to the people who were living in them, and then transferred in that process all of the attendant issues associated with the house, knowing full well that the people who were living in these houses could never repair the houses. So in many housing schemes across Barbados, as a result of the policy, they gave you the deeds to the house, or should have, but they took away any kind of association of dealing with the houses. So you inherit a house that is in need of repair under the guise that you've been given a house, knowing now that you have to put money that you don't have into the repair. And you watch some of these housing units now looking worse and worse for it, because nobody, the government is not able to do it because it's no longer the government's property, and the people to whom the houses were given are not in a financial position. They don't have the wherewithal, sir, to fix them. And you watch as these houses fall further and further into disrepair. And during our campaign, during what we would consider the Rubbing Shoulders program, Mr. Speaker, sir, we visited a number of these housing schemes. And we saw there were houses meant to accommodate one generation of people, holding 4 and 5 generations of people. You would find a house with people in their 80s and in their 90s, some in their 70s, some in their 50s, some in their 40s, 30s, teens, children, babies. All generations, 6 different generations, sometimes occupying a space that was never meant to accommodate so many people. We need, sir, in Barbados, a housing policy that makes sense. And the government would never be in a position to do it all. And even with the best of intentions, the Honourable Member for St. Andrew, my Member of Parliament, would not be able to do it all, sir, but we know that we came and that there are some things that we have to sanitize if we are going to make Barbados better for people. And I think about the country that is Barbados. When I moved, sir, from my Lord's Hill in the constituency in St. Michael East to St. Michael South East, sir, in the Pine, it was a step up in my own circumstances, a gift, I thought. And I know, having lived there most of my life, how people judge people who come from these challenged areas. And a lot of that is because of the associated societal issues that arise in these areas. You build housing solutions without careful consideration to the many issues that would affect people. A housing solution sometimes can cause other problems. And as Newton said in his third law, for every action, there really is an equal and opposite reaction. So when we build out these housing solutions meant to house people, but you don't have any place for people to play. The playing facilities, for the most part, are not enough. And in the cases where the playing facilities do exist, sir, they are left in a state of disrepair too. The monkey bars are a death threat if you were to attempt to swing on them. We have, when we build out our housing policy, to give careful consideration to all of these associated issues, Mr. Speaker, sir. Because in the new Barbados, we cannot operate in silos. I cannot say, because I am the Minister of Blue Economy, that what happens in the Ministry of Youth does not affect me. I cannot say what happens in the Ministry of Agriculture and in Housing and in Foreign Affairs and definitely in Culture does not affect me, because they do. And everything that we do has social implications, so the Honourable Member for St. Thomas must be in every conversation that we have. And my constituency, Mr. Speaker, sir, and the constituency of St. Michael Central are very much the same. So you know the issues that we are dealing with. But I believe that any policy, any government solution, sir, must attend to 3 areas. You know, when you're building out a housing solution, or any other social policy, it is about how problems are managed, how needs are met, and if there are opportunities for advancement. That is the test, really, of a good policy. It must look at the needs of people and attend to them if they can. It must manage problems, and sir, you must always create opportunities for advancement. Now, having lived in an area like this, and I think about the opportunities for advancement, and I'll speak about those first. Do you understand the policy of a government, and I hope we reconsider it, where if you live in a unit, a government unit, and you struggle through school, Mr. Speaker, sir, and then you go on to university and you're allowed to get a job that pays you barely above what is minimum wage, barely enough to keep your head above water. You make, as I did in my first job, $1,800 a month, Mr. Speaker, sir. You then have put yourself and your family above the requirement that would allow you to stay in that unit. So for the most part, back then, I'm pretty sure that's not going to be your policy, but for the most part, when they say, well, you're making now $2,000 a month, you're no longer fit for living in this unit. So you barely making ends meet. You either now have to make a choice. You either have to leave the unit, dodge the government, or be radical and stay and say that you're not leaving. But the deeper societal issue for me is that what you do is that you force the people who may be positive role models for other people out of the community that they live in. So when you move the people who, because they've don't made an extra dollar out of the housing units, and I understand the policy, I do, but I'm just saying for every action there is an equal and opposite reaction. You therefore leave people to not see any examples of success, or what it means to be able to rise above your own circumstances, because in so doing you're no longer allowed to stay in those circumstances. And I feel, sir, that is something that we have to look at. And I feel, along with our social policy, our housing policy, we have already said that we want to see people giving back community service. So that I feel it makes sense to stay in the unit, but that you have to give back to your community. We have to think holistically about our social policies. So you stay because you really can't afford to go anywhere. You're making $1,800 a month, $1,500 a month, and the rents in Barbados now for a decent place, $1,200. You really can't afford to go anywhere. But you're above what the National Housing Corporation allows you to stay. You really can't afford to go. But I'm saying allow people to stay. But as part of that agreement, you have a responsibility too. So you then have to go and attend to the needs of the people who live in your community. Offer some lessons to people. Clean up your community. Keep it clean. I have no interest, as you know, Mr. Speaker, sir, in plastics. So have some people taking the plastics off the street. But our housing policy, sir, must be a holistic policy. Thank you very much. And that is how I feel that we must build out and flesh out a new Barbados. Because, sir, as you know, for every action, there really is an equal and opposite reaction. And so a housing solution must be seen in the context not only of a housing solution, but a social policy intervention and an economic intervention, so that we give further thought to the way we want Barbados to look and to the kind of Barbados that we want to build out. It should not, Mr. Speaker, sir, be seen as a story or a miracle when somebody born into those kinds of conditions is then able to go on and make something of himself. Because that says to me we do not expect people born into those conditions to be able to make something of themselves. But this government has the reverse philosophy. We know that people born into any conditions in the right environment can make something of themselves, because all Barbadians were born great, sir, by virtue of being born in what I think is the greatest country in the world. But it cannot be a story worth telling when somebody has gone on to do a little something, because we're almost admitting by default that we don't expect people to do something because of where they're born. And so I feel that we have to think more holistically about our housing policies and our housing solutions. Mr. Speaker, sir, I represent the constituency of St. Michael South. And I am very happy to be their representative. I thank God for it every day. And like most members in here, I still do my constituency clinics. So every Wednesday, I try to be in my constituency, attending to the needs of my constituents. And there are three things that I would say are the norm for people who come to see me. People want sometimes financial assistance, but that's not the number one thing. The two other things that people want most, and I'm sure all the other members in here know it, are jobs and housing. And I have written so many letters to the Ministry of Housing and to National Housing Corporation, and I know that the Minister of Housing is under great pressure, because he said the waiting list is already 30,000 strong. And it is going to be difficult to be able to give everybody a government housing solution. And I think people understand that in theory, but I want to read, Mr. Speaker, sir, with your permission, a WhatsApp that was sent to me by a young lady who came to see me in my constituency. And she said, "Good morning." And she said, "People that live in houses get houses. I owe a landlord money. Kirk, I should be able to get something. My situation is urgent. The landlord could even put me in court for her money. Kirk, I vote for you, and I still ain't getting no help." And I spoke to this young lady, sir, and I'm sure this is the story for all of us, all 30 of us. I spoke to the young lady and I said, well, I understand you voted for me and I thank you very much for voting for me. But there is no way that this government will be able, first of all, to address all the problems that were associated with the former government, but to create those kinds of housing solutions. And that is why I say we have to look at this holistically. And she understood. She understood in principle, but the reality is that when somebody is wet, when the rain falls, they want a housing solution. When someone, Mr. Speaker, sir, is unable to eat, they want money to be able to buy something to eat. Unless somebody feels that they should be able to get a job, then even though the circumstances are such that we are sending people home from many government institutions, they still ask for positions, sir, primarily in school meals department, the Ministry of Transport and Works, a lot of the time sanitation as well. Sir, there are people who come and they know we explain the circumstances, but they understand it in theory, but the reality is that these are hard times for people. And as a government, we have to be cognizant of all these things. That is why I feel, sir, as we build out the new Barbados, that our housing policy must consider these things. I speak to the Honourable Member for St. Philip West all the time about what we have to do in the creative industries. Sir, there has to be new ways of creating employment for people in Barbados. And the arts must never just be a place where people go to pass time. Sir, I believe that there is a whole market waiting to be explored. And that there are these areas where people can then get new and innovative jobs and allow them to live as men and women of dignity in this country, so that when they enter into what I consider to be a private transaction with a landlord, they are in a position to pay the rent. Because most people don't want a handout. Most people want a hand up. And this government must be giving people a hand up. But not through being able to offer everybody a free house, sir. We can't do it. Most people do not want it. We have to build a country that allows people to get jobs and to get work so that they can go on and live a decent life in Barbados. And Mr. Speaker, sir, I have listened to women, sir, come into my constituency. I've seen many of them feeling broken. Sir, living in conditions with their children that really nobody should live. Sir, prepared to do some things sometimes that no woman should have to do. And it breaks my heart oftentimes when I see the extent to which people are prepared to go to get a house in Barbados. It must never happen in Barbados. And as a government, sir, we cannot say this is part of the conversation that we wish to have. So I came into St. Michael's South, and let me tell you about some of the issues we had, sir, and I'm sure you have many of the same. Sir, in St. Michael's South, I still have pit toilets. I have a number of pit toilets in my constituency. And having used one when I lived in St. Michael East, I know what a pit toilet is like. I mean, you're glad to be able to use a bathroom, but in a 2018 Barbados, pit toilets cannot be who we are. It cannot define who we are, and it must no longer be part of the narrative. And that is why I am so thankful to say that as part of our wider government program, we have a pit toilet eradication program, which you will see roll out very, very soon, as part of the housing solutions that we offer through the various agencies that are responsible for housing. Sir, in my constituency, I have play parks and national parks that were traditionally overgrown with bush. Nobody paying attention to those things. And thankfully now I've seen a greater effort being made by the Honourable Member for St. Michael East through the NCC to be able to keep these places in check. And this is important, sir, because people associate a value with how their areas look. We have to help people help themselves. You may know, sir, pretty sure you do, there's a broken window theory in policy. That if you allow a window to be broken and you don't fix it, eventually allow a second window to be broken. And then eventually you allow a door to fall off. And then the roof may cave in, because if you don't start dealing with the problems quickly, eventually the whole thing runs to ruin. But if you fix them as they occur, well then, sir, you do a lot. There's also the theory that if you upgrade a place, so if you debush in front of area, the person is more likely to paint the front of their house or to grow a little garden. We have to help Barbadians help themselves in this new Barbados. And Mr. Speaker, sir, we have a roof repair program that we will be rolling out soon as well. And I am very pleased to be associated with it because I know every time it rains in Barbados, and I'm sure many other members know, I'm sure you know, Mr. Speaker, sir, that every time it rains in Barbados, you could count on your hand and your toes that somebody in your constituency is about to get wet or getting wet. And that some people have to huddle in rooms in their houses to not get wet. You know it. We know it. That every time it rains, sir, I start to feel in my chest a certain sadness. Because I know that there are certain places in Charleston and in parts of the Bayland and in Paddock Road where my constituents are now huddled. And I also know that there are places where whenever it rains, it is going to flood. And when we build out our new housing solution, sir, we must take into consideration all these things. The unfortunate reality is that we came into government at a time when it seems to me, for the last 10 years, the country stood still. And while everything was falling apart, there was no effort on the behalf of the government to make wrong things right. So we now have to walk and talk at the same time. We have to engage in conversation while we try to fix a lot of these associated problems. We have to fix the drainage, deal with the debushing, help people repair their houses, try to give people a way to live, a real way to live. And sir, Mr. Speaker, sir, there are people who we know on the eve of the last general election were given all kinds of jobs in the public service, knowing full well that the public service could not accommodate any more people. Those people, because they took faith in the persons who gave them the job, having said you get a government job, you good, knowing full well, sir, this is the level of deceit, and this is why I feel we must never forgive them. Knowing full well that the people could not stay in the jobs, allowing people then to go and enter into transactions to get houses, Mr. Speaker, sir. Take up mortgages, some of them are believing they can help their mother and their father with mortgages. Pick up rents. Take out furniture. Owing all of the stores in Barbados. When the government knew that they could not withstand it. So now, a lot of these persons are no longer employed because the government gave them a fake deal, the former government. And now they can't afford the houses that they're in and being threatened with eviction. A lot of the people having their things repossessed, and the members in here know it because I'm sure people come to them too. The things, their possessions having been repossessed. All of these things because we had a government that acted in the last term in a way that no government in Barbados should act. I say all the time, for every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction, and the people understood that they got tricked. And the consequences you saw on May 24th. We as a government must never be guilty of the thing we condemn the most, which is to trick poor people. We must never be, Mr. Speaker, sir. And so I see this housing solution being brought by the Honourable Member for St. Andrew as a good thing. And I offer it my fullest support. We, as a government, reject the status quo that currently exists in many ways when it comes to housing. We say what worked for 20 years ago will not work for the next 20 years. Sir, the Honourable Member for the constituency of St. Philip South, the Minister for Agriculture, when he speaks about what he's preparing to do in helping people through agriculture and vertical farming in their houses and so on the transformation that is coming, you know that this is a government that is thinking big term. You know that when we speak to housing, we are talking big term. We have a big vision, and that we must bring everybody along as part of that vision. Our new housing solution must speak to that vision. And Mr. Speaker, sir, there is nothing that fills a Barbadian heart with more pride than to say, I have a key to my house. I mean, Barbadians joke that if you give anybody a key at all to any building, they act as if they're almost the only place. But Barbadians feel a sense of pride when they have keys to a building. The Honourable Member for St. Andrew, sir, is charged in many ways with restoring pride to our country. by being able to offer housing solutions that make sense, by being part of a government that understands the social policy implications, but also the economic realities, and to be able to offer people a place that they can live in Barbados as men and women of dignity. And if none of us, sir, if any one of us came into this great chamber, Mr. Speaker, sir, with any other intention than to make people's lives better than we are in the wrong profession. And our housing policy, sir, because housing is not a discrete enterprise. You don't hide and build houses. I mean, they say you can hide and buy land, but you can't hide and walk it. Housing is not a discrete enterprise. People will know when you're building a house. People will put on Facebook sometimes when you build massive, exorbitant houses outside of your own personal wages, sir. But anyway, we know, sir, that at the end of the day, every Barbadian has a right to feel good about living in this country. I feel good to support this resolution brought by the member for St. Andrew, because I know this will make other Barbadians feel good. I know that as long as we continue to work together as a collective, then everybody will be good. The Honourable Member for the city, my neighbour in many ways, sir, my brethren in every other way. He understands, sir, that when you have housing solutions, as we saw when the rain fell, recently the rain fell and the Bayland flooded out, and all over the city flooded out, if you don't give careful consideration to the drainage and the way you raise the houses, the height of the houses, sir, you offering up yourself for potential all kinds of hazard risks, mosquitoes and other diseases. When the pit toilet overflows and then flows back into the yard, it's a health threat. And sir, all of our
member
policies...
has 2 more minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir. All of our policies, sir, must speak to the new Barbados that we wish to build. It must. And you know, Mr. Speaker, sir, more than most of us in this chamber, because you, sir, have been studying climate change, unlike anybody else in this chamber. You know, with the recent changes in the climate, that we can expect more frequent, more intense, and in many cases more devastating events that are natural, sir, and that could dislocate and reverse all of our gains in a few hours. And you know, sir, that we have to build housing solutions that are able to withstand the threat as much as we can of climate change. In the city, we know we got to build houses perhaps a little bit higher. We know we got to fix drainage. But, sir, we must do so as a collective. And, sir, as I take my seat, I wish to support in the strongest way this resolution, and to say that I believe this and all that we will do in housing will be good for the people of Barbados. I am obliged.
The Honourable Member for St. Philip South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise this morning to make my contribution in support of this resolution before this honorable chamber. Being ever mindful, as I always am, and grateful to the people of St. Philip South for giving me the honor and privilege of speaking on their behalf. Mr. Speaker, as we look to celebrate our 52nd year of independence, I am indeed heartened, first of all, by the performance of the government of which I am a member of, having received an upgrade from the pits of embarrassment, carrying downgrade after downgrade for nearly 10 years to the stage of junk bond status. And if, apart from the people of St. Philip South, something is making me proud, I'm absolutely proud and stand in honor of being part of a team that can put us where we rightfully belong and carrying an investment grade that says, this is Barbados. Mr. Speaker, if we are going to speak to social engineering, perhaps we need to do so being mindful of what those who came before us were able to do at a time when times demanded their action to suit the conditions that existed. And Mr. Speaker, you may hear our Prime Minister constantly repeat, being fit for purpose. And I believe that at this 21st century juncture, and in going into our 52nd year of independence celebration, the one thing that we must be is fit for purpose. Mr. Speaker, only in the second decade of our celebrating independence, the Honourable Tom Adams was able to bring a piece of legislation to this Parliament, the Tenantry Freehold Purchase Act, that spoke to what is really social engineering. And through that piece of legislation, Mr. Speaker, he was able to transform the lives of ordinary people like myself, who, when I reflect on when we were growing up in Church Village and in Clifden just off Guinea, those tenantries and villages were a mere reflection of people who came off the plantocracy and people who worked hard on plantations and had to rent land from the plantation owners. And that the visionary Tom Adams at the time thought that the time had come when these very people should own the lands on which they were living. And so the Tenantry Freehold Purchase Act gave them an opportunity to purchase those lands at 10 cents a square foot. And if, Mr. Speaker, sir, if there's a time that we, all of us in this chamber, should constantly repeat what Tom Adams did, this is the time in our 52nd year of independence that we should be repeating it. Because what we had to recover from in the last 10 years, we need to reflect on the great things done by great people for this great nation. Mr. Speaker, as we are now, when it speaks to housing solutions, I'm in awe. I'm indeed very disappointed that what we are looking at is something of what I would call ominous portent. It is a social setback. Mr. Speaker, there are several things that we as a people must take into consideration as we seek to build our nation. And that responsibility falls to us who have been elected by the people of Barbados to make sure we get it right. And Mr. Speaker, we now have to contemplate, after seeing all the lavish PR between the period of 2008 and 2013 about this great housing every last person, something called help. And if that is how you help, nobody should want to be associated with that, because it is not the way to help the most vulnerable. And Mr. Speaker, the lavish PR about all the housing projects. You can get housing projects at River in St. Philip, Riverview, River Crescent, Coverley, the Boss went on, Lancaster, Constant in St. George, and we can go on and on and on and on. And Mr. Speaker, those housing solutions did not help, but they had one thing at the core of every last one. And when you hear rumors going around about $5,000 and $10,000 going to a minister, and then you see a country ending up with the level of corruption that we have had to investigate since we became a government, sir, we have to start to wonder what had become of us in the last decade. We know it's a lost decade, but we also know that those good men and women who stand in Barbados as victims of the greed of a people who sought only to look after themselves, but never cared to understand that the reason why I articulated my standing here is the very reason they were able to stand here. And that is through the support of the people who put them here. And that you would then put your personal agenda ahead of the very people who repose their trust and confidence in you to be able to do what is right for them at a time when we are boasting of celebrating 52 years of independence. I say, Mr. Speaker, sir, I am waiting for that time to come because the people have been asking for it. And if we are able to do it, Mr. Speaker, sir, we will be a government forever by the people. And I'm speaking to someone having to pay a heavy price for what happened to this country. Mr. Speaker, who is at risk in all of this? You have people who are considered in the lower income group. You got your postman, you got your maid, you got your messenger, janitor, general workers. When the Barbados Labour Party started its housing program, Tom Adams, under the Tenantry Freehold Purchase Act, made sure that these most vulnerable people were protected, because at 10 cents a square foot, they were protected. Mr. Speaker, you then fast forward to an era where people were boasting about looking after poor people, building communities, one community at a time. And what they were doing, sir, was making sure they disenfranchised people, whilst at the same time destroy every social entitlement that they had. Healthcare, education, housing, the basics. And that you would tell me you're going to construct a house that is almost the complete resemblance of a matchbox, but that is far out the reach of a person who's working for low income, completely out of their reach. How did it happen? Who would price a structure so small over $100,000? Something had to be seriously wrong. And that this needs further investigation, Mr. Speaker, sir. But I take this a little further. If you look at projects, Mr. Speaker, that were touted to be projects for people of the middle-income group, and you start to understand what happened to those people under the heavy tax regime that was foisted upon them, people who've already had themselves in debt, sending their children to school, university fees and all the rest of it, people who had to look after their own health care. And then, Mr. Speaker, having to carry the burden of increased taxation and removal of benefits to them, then you understand that they also took it out of the reach of the middle class. But Mr. Speaker, more importantly, within those two groups, you had people who we referred to as temporary workers. And I asked at which point in time does temporary end? Because I've had people approach me telling me they were in the system for 5 years and 8 years and still temporary. This is a conversation we need to have. This must be addressed, Mr. Speaker, sir. And we must determine when temporary ends. Because those people, if they go to the bank to get a mortgage, they're going to have problems. If they go to the credit union, they're going to have problems. If they go to any other lending institution, they're going to have problems. If they go to the National Housing Corporation to complete an application to qualify for a housing solution in Barbados, they still have to go back to a lending institution. And Mr. Speaker, what is it that stands in the way? The word temporary. It stands in the way. And this also must be a conversation for the trade unions of Barbados as well. Because if we are going to look at Barbados in a holistic way, I do believe that we have to have all the stakeholders on board. And I do believe that we have to take this country forward now, recognizing that those people who have reposed their trust and confidence in us must be the ones that we make sure, in good conscience, we look after them and make sure they are protected and are allowed to participate. And I simply, Mr. Speaker, sir, will not stand by and watch the good people of St. Philip South continue to be disadvantaged by systems that are in place that we can correct. I equally will not stand by and see it happen to any Barbadian, no matter where he or she lives. Mr. Speaker, I have a constituency that I enjoy the honor of serving. Well, Mr. Speaker, just like my colleague from St. Michael East, we have situations where Tom Adams and his social piece of engineering in the Tenantry Freehold Purchase Act legislation must stand before us so that we can address issues that we are confronted by in a 21st century existence. And I speak, sir, to those people who have no choice but to occupy land, to merely exist. And those are people who I call landless land users. Others refer to them as squatters. But I seek to sanitize it because I know the connotations of Barbados. And I know once you say certain things in Barbados, especially when you're in public life, you can be pilloried by those who have the agenda. But Mr. Speaker, I know if you look at me, you can see my shoulders are fairly broad. And I'm prepared, Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the people who put me here to defend them. And Mr. Speaker, I do not in any way condone behavior of people who will seek to disadvantage another simply by taking that which is not his or her own. But my heart bleeds every time I look at a female single parent with 3 or 4 children, and mind you, bright children. And I can give you a real example in a place called Work Hall in St. Philip, where this lady simply cannot afford to buy housing, cannot afford to buy land, cannot even afford to pay rent, but has to find a way to survive for herself and 3 children, 3 bright children, one of which goes to Harrison College, another one heading for Combermere. I'm talking about bright children. And they are able to do so, you honourable member for the city, up and on.
So I would also acclaim that honourable member.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, sir. But you will have it that do you understand from living under those circumstances, children can still rise to the top? Well, this is commendable. And what do we as a responsible government do? And we can't continue to ask the welfare department to give them a voucher to go to the supermarket and think that that is all. And equally, we can't continue to have any politician give them a back-to-school voucher and think that this is all. Mr. Speaker, we can do better. And my proposal is that we now seek to regularize the living conditions of all those people who have been so disadvantaged that they had to find ways and means to survive over and beyond what is legally and politically correct. And how do we fix this, Mr. Speaker? We fix this, first of all, by being bold. We fix this by going to a system of regularization where you go through a complete assessment and cost-benefit analysis to be able to create the solution that becomes a suitable fit for what we are hoping to correct. Now, Mr. Speaker, I recall when the Honourable Member for St. Andrew was in my constituency, and we did a press briefing, and it was carried on the news that the Honourable Member for St. Michael East and the Honourable Member for St. Andrew want to encourage people in squatting. And the very person that went to a brass tacks program the following morning criticizing us for wanting to give people an equal opportunity and a chance to live in comfort suggested that we were not suitable to be a government. And two things stuck out with me at the time because we were in the opposition. And I thought here was an opportunity for us to show that we're serious. The person making the comments, Mr. Speaker, was not a poor person. She actually was living in the comfort of her house the morning it was raining, and my heart was hurting because I knew she had breakfast. She could not have been living the lavish life she's living and didn't have breakfast. I also know, Mr. Speaker, that she was accommodated to live here in Barbados with no problems, but seeks to torment us all the time when she gets on a call-in program, and nobody troubles her. But then you would take those poor people who had no choice, and she wants the government of the day to go and disrupt them and throw them out into the streets, Mr. Speaker. And my heart bled the morning because I knew within good conscience that what I said the evening before was perfectly right and suitable for people who had no choice but find a way to survive. And Mr. Speaker, we in Barbados tolerate a lot. We do. But there is something called real suffering in this country, Mr. Speaker. And that I had to get in my vehicle to go and take lunch for some of those people. Many days having to provide groceries. You look at the living conditions, no waterborne facilities. And you run the risk then of people when you get floods, when it rains heavily, and pit toilets are flooded out. You start to contemplate what can happen. And that one person who believes that her only agenda is to criticize the Barbados Labour Party would come on a radio program to criticize any attempts or any conversation we had about regularizing the lives of people who are living in abject poverty is a mean, cruel person. And Mr. Speaker, I can only reflect on that person the way Cicero did when he spoke of evil. He said, evil is a palpable force, more potent than lightning. And that is exactly how it was, Mr. Speaker, that morning. Mr. Speaker, I make no apologies for wanting the best for the people of Barbados. Mr. Speaker, I make no apologies for wanting people who cannot help themselves be given a solution through the government of Barbados. Mr. Speaker, I completely agree and support the Honourable Member for St. Andrew, the Honourable Minister of Housing. For this resolution, and for his bold approach to tackling the problem of housing solutions in Barbados. But Mr. Speaker, I have also to issue him a warning. Please do not allow yourself to be trapped into delivering housing solutions looking like those that we currently have, that were constructed at River and that were constructed in other parts of Barbados. You cannot give a person a housing solution and he or she cannot get the bed through the door. You cannot give a person a housing solution and the refrigerator is taking up the kitchen and the living room. You cannot give a person a housing solution where the bathroom is too close to the kitchen. And so if we are going to give housing solutions, the first thing we want to do is make sure we get the deliverables right. And when I speak to deliverables, it starts at the point of construction. At that point, where you negotiate the per square meter or whatever price to make sure that when you deliver a solution, it falls where it is supposed to go. And that a postman, a general worker, when he or she applies, they should have no issues with salary and qualification based on salaries. Mr. Speaker, through you, I am asking the Honourable Member for St. Andrew to remember that our role and our purpose in all of this is to help those who are most vulnerable. And those who are most vulnerable, we will take care of, because I am on record of saying that we have a system of democracy and free enterprise. And within that system, Mr. Speaker, sir, we have a very rich working democracy. That's why I'm here today. No guns nor bullets got me here. We have a rich working democracy. And I'm proud to be part of this in our 52nd year of independence. But equally, Mr. Speaker, sir, we have free enterprise. And all that does is give everybody a chance to participate, but it guarantees you nothing more. You have to make it work. And therefore, a government must understand its role in there and put in the social support as that buffer against which people should fall. And when I talk about that buffer, I'm talking about the provision of education because you want them to participate, health care because you want them to survive, and housing solutions because you want them to be comfortable. And you know what comfort does for a country. You know what comfort can do for communities. You know what comfort can do for our people. And if I need to give you an example of what comfort can do, look at the Standard & Poor's upgrade of Barbados after we became a government. That's what comfort is about. When people have confidence in self and in you. And so, Mr. Speaker, I say to this Honourable Chamber that our housing solutions shall now be equally as transformational in this 21st century and at this juncture of our 52nd year of independence as Tom Adams' Tenantry Freehold Purchase Act was at the time when he found a solution for the people of Barbados. Mr. Speaker, there's nothing more left for me to say. I believe that those who were within earshot of my voice and wherever this presentation was carried, the one thing I want to leave with all of you is that we are the servants of the people of this country. I'm obliged to you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Member for St. George North.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I rise to take part in this debate because when it was introduced, I was in the chair at the time, and I would want at this point in time to lend my voice to this important debate, and also to compliment the minister, who I know is a hard-working minister, who has done a lot of work in housing over the years, and who has a lot of time to do work on behalf of the people of Barbados. And I know that one of the things I admire about the minister is that he listens. And I would want him to look carefully at some of the policies that were introduced over the years. I want to start from where the last member left. I want to look carefully and analyze, because one of the things that we have to do at the Parliament is to analyze where we have come from, where we are going. I heard members talk about the Tenantries Freehold Purchase Act and what it was, and how important and visionary Tom Adams was. But when you examine the whole concept of the Tenantries Freehold Purchase Act, there are certain trends and comments that we need to look at. First of all, Mr. Speaker, we talk of Tom Adams recognized that land was the issue. Land. Without land, persons cannot establish a house. And he recognized that poor people would remain poor if they had no access to land. And therefore, taking land at a time and giving to the poor at 10 cents a square foot was visionary at the time. Also, the question of who did he give it to? He gave the land to the persons who occupied the tenants, who occupied those lands for years. Tenants and their parents before them occupying the land. So he gave it to people who were poor and to those persons who worked on the plantation. So the concept was to give to those persons who were working on the plantations for years as slaves and also as free men after the adult suffrage was passed, after the slavery was abolished. And he also recognized that there was a role for government. So there are a tripartite system. The private sector, the landlord, the tenants, and of course government. What was the role of government? Government has a role in all of this. Government has to be visionary. Government has to take chances and steps. Government has to look at the policy of the day and how it helps. Even in these hard times, the government must be willing to look at new approaches. And therefore, since we recognize that the Tenantry Freehold Purchase Act was a good act in 1981, and that's over 50 years ago, maybe, not so long, 50, 19 and 37 years ago. What it is now that we must do. Now, first of all, I want to say to the minister that over the past 10 years, the then government did very little to further the tenantries program. That came to a halt. And there are still a number of persons who have not benefited, who live on the plantation, who have not benefited from that act. There are some landlords who continue to withhold the conveyance. And we still have a number of persons in my constituency, for example, at Groves, at Lower State. You have a few people across, and then every tenantry across Barbados, you still have people who have not benefited because the last government did not feel that the people had the right to own these lands. And some landlords believe so too, that it was too cheap for them. So we have to go to the backtracking. And within the Ministry of Housing, there's a department called the Management Section that looks after backtracking. And we need to see how persons within Barbados who still live on the plantations can have access to those lots. Within urban Barbados too, we further look in the last BLP administration, the 250 square foot land for the urban tenantries. There are still many people in the urban Barbados who cannot have access to land. In your constituency, Mr. Speaker, and in most constituencies across St. Michael, there are people who have been living on private tenantries who can pay the 250 and will pay the 250 a square foot. And then I want to remind members that the Act stated, the amendment to the Act in 97 felt that we will not disadvantage the landlord. The landlord will charge market price. If the market price was $10 a square foot, the tenant only pays $2.50 a square foot. And the government will put in the balance. That was the government will subsidize the difference, so that the tenants pay $2.50 and the government will pay $7 a square foot for the land. But in the last administration, Mr. Speaker, the government did not put in their share, so that many tenants had their $2.50 and registered their $2.50 a square foot with the urban corporation, but the urban corporation did not have the money to complete the sale. Now this is disgraceful. And there are many people within urban Barbados who cannot complete the sale. And I want to urge the minister to ensure that the government, despite its hardship today, complete its arrangement. Government must complete that arrangement, put in the difference between the $2.50 and the market price, because we were at a point in time in the 90s when we were saying we do not want to disadvantage landlord. So having said that, the Tenantries Purchase Act was visionary. But where do we go from here? Where do we go from here? Mr. Speaker, I am of the view in this year, 2018, we have to be visionary too. We have to look and see how we could subsidize and help the poor. We have to see how we could push housing for the middle income. We have to look and see how we can do things to make Barbados a thriving society. Despite we are in IMF a program, I am convinced that there's still a lot of things that can be done. I have lived in certain societies and I saw how poor people were treated, and I can tell you that within certain capital society, there's still semblance of how you treat for the poor, because we believe that people have a right for housing. People have a right for shelter and food. And therefore, the government must take care, even though in harsh time, must take care of those persons at the very low end. But how do you take care of those persons? How do you take care of those persons who are not working? You have to look at income. You have to look at not only income, but at gender. And we know that traditionally, it is the woman that carries the burden of the brunt of the burden. How do we help her? How do we help little children? And I believe, Mr. Speaker, we have to look carefully at our conveyance system. Now, the minister is recognized as one of the best conveyancers in the country. The Minister of Housing is regarded as one of the best conveyancers in this country, the present minister. I would want the minister to look at the present system, because we need to look at leases. If land is the problem, we have to look at long leases. Is it not possible for us to look at a system where persons can obtain land at long leases, Mr. Speaker, where they can take this lease to the credit union and get money to get a house? I am saying that that's the problem. We recognize the problem in the 80s, that land was the problem. It is still the problem. It is still the problem. Many people cannot buy a house spot. The cost of housing is expensive. And the very first cost is the cost of land. And if the cost of land is expensive, let's do something about it. The government can enter an arrangement, and who got money? There's no shortage of money in Barbados. The government may have a problem with cash flow. But when you look at the banking system in Barbados, Mr. Speaker, the credit unions are washing money. We have to empower the credit unions, empower the financial institutions to come out of their shell and be bold. I heard the member for St. Philip West talk about boldness, and I agree with him. Is it not possible for us, Mr. Speaker, for the government to enter an arrangement with the credit unions and the cooperatives in Barbados and provide leases so that people can, they're members, because the credit union now is taken over from the banking system. The credit union's members are now more than, I believe, more than 3,000 or 4,000. This will also encourage people to join the credit union. And having joined the credit union now, you provide long leases to these people so they can obtain a mortgage. And again, we may have to look at the whole concept of mortgage. Again, I, the minister, need to look at this whole concept of mortgage, because we know that in a capitalist society, when you give a man a mortgage, you end up paying 3 and 4 times. You borrow a loan, and the banking system has been very unfair to the ordinary people. You borrow a loan of $50,000 and end up paying $300,000, $400,000, because of the nature of the interest system. I am not sure if it is simple interest. I'm not sure if it is compound interest, but I believe the accountants in here will tell me what type of interest you charge. The mortgage system in this country and around the world in the capitalist system need to change. We need to have a simple system where a man born alone, because he has a lease in his hand, a long lease, and the minister will have, when he get up, can tell me if a lease can work. If I have a long lease for 25 years, 30 years, 40 years, Mr. Speaker, a simple lease where I can take this lease to the bank and say, I want $50,000, I can afford to pay, because many people in your constituency, Mr. Speaker, can't afford to pay not the down payment, but the monthly payment. I can afford to pay $500 in housing because I am paying rent. My rent every year, my rent is $600 or $700. Can I not pay the $600 now as we pay as a loan? And it's through a simple arrangement where the bank will charge minimum interest, not the mortgage. We have to come up with a bold step like what Tom Adams did in the 80s. Look at a system where poor people can obtain a simple loan from the credit unions. And I'm not talking about the banks, because we want to be able, Mr. Speaker, to push the notion of credit unions in this country. We have to understand that when the credit unions own the money, it is the members' money, and members will be owning the land as well as the property. So we need to have a system. I hope the minister will look at that system, look at the whole conveyance system, and how we can put long leases in place, since people cannot buy the land that they want to buy, because the very first thing in the whole thing is the land. Secondly, Mr. Speaker, we have to be bold too in going up. I know the cost of high-rise is also a problem. I used to live in Toronto on the 18th floor. The 18th floor, my whole family at the time. 18th floor when I was living in Toronto at that time. And it never hurt, but people in Barbados feel you can't go up. I remember a couple of years ago, you had to fight the tongue planner to understand that you can't go below 3 or 4 stories. The very first high rise we did was London born, and that was 3. But we have to go up, because if land is expensive, Mr. Speaker, go high rise. Allow people to live high rise. We have to go up and be bold. I understand there are certain places, like the airport, you can't build beyond a certain height, and I understand that. You have to look at color. I saw what happened in Bermuda. All Bermuda houses are white and blue. White and blue. And the reason for that, there must be some reason. We have, and in terms of water storage, we have to also look at that. But we have to build up. We have to build up and allow persons with money. We have to also challenge those persons who have lots of savings in the banking system to come and invest and help build out our country. But we have to be able to secure, government have to be able to secure those monies. So now, Mr. Speaker, in this Parliament, I have hope. And the reason why we have hope, because this is the Barbados Labour Party. We have hope because the Barbados Labour Party understands. We were the first party that understand at the time that you had to bring people out of poverty. It was Sir Grantley Adams that did it when he set up the Housing Corporation. It was Tom Adams that had the vision for the Tenantries Freehold Purchase Act. It was the last ONF administration that piloted the Urban Tenantries Act. We have to, therefore, in this parliament, to look at new modalities, new instruments, to bring poor people out. And I have spoken about this before, that there need to be a new vision for St. Michael. There need to be a new vision. We started it when we went to IRDB in our last term and had the Housing Neighborhood Watch. We fought the IRDB and got money. And the government sent back, the government of the day, 10 years of waste, sent back that money. And housing, because we were, that housing neighborhood upgrade was to provide not only upgrade for toilet facilities, upgrade for roads, but garbage collection, sewage, everything. It was a complete package. And we send back that money. Now, the minister will have to, it's going to be tight now to negotiate another package like that. But we need a new deal. And my belief, Mr. Speaker, is a new deal must look at, and the lawyers are here, need to look at, do we need the original conveyances at every time, or should we provide long leases to help poor people to obtain a document that they can carry to the financial institution to unleash the resources, because housing is expensive. The middle income group, you could also look at housing for the middle income as well in the terms of the lease. We could also look at housing for those persons who are wealthy, those persons who are working beyond the middle income might be able to help themselves. The cost of land in Barbados sometimes could be expensive. I know that the Ministry of Housing, in the last administration, when it was Minister of Housing, we were selling land at $5 a square foot. The last administration took that $5 to $15, and I know there's something the minister inherited. Land at Constant was $15, Mr. Minister. 15, 13, and all sort of things. Land is expensive. How are you asking a man that working for $200 a week to pay for land that he has to pay, $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 for a spot of land? It's expensive. And since he cannot pay, Mr. Speaker, but he wants a house, we have to help him, because we are the government that represents the poor people of this country. We can do it, and we have to look at that instrument and give long leases. Minister, you have to look at how do you do it. No, you will have to work out with a team. I am tired coming through places, and I go off the member for the city will speak on this. We go through, we had a deal. We had a deal for clearing low-lying areas, and I hear ministers now people talking about this. We were talking about, I was the man the minister who at the time saw what was happening around the central bank, and we cleared the people from there. We got criticized, but now they're living up in Lower Burney and doing well. We did that. This is the Barbados Labour Party that did that. And we have a church village. We have to be able to look at what is happening in downtown Bridgetown, in the outer skirts of New Orleans. We have to look at what is happening up in Nelson Street and give people a new deal. A new deal. But they can only get a new deal, Mr. Speaker, if we provide the land at long-term leases. They cannot buy the land. They do not have the money, the resources. The government must use its fiscal. The government has numbers. We don't have a problem with numbers now. So we have to use our numbers for the good of the people of this country. Mr. Speaker, I'm obliged to you.
Honourable member for Christchurch West Central.
Mr. Speaker, I thank you. I raise, Mr. Speaker, to support this resolution, the vesting of land to the National Housing under the Land Acquisition Act. Mr. Speaker, 8,265.1 square meters at Clus in the parish of St. Lucie, and I thank the Member of Parliament for St. Andrew, the Honourable Minister, for bringing such a resolution. Mr. Speaker, let me take this time to also commend the economic team of the Barbados Labour Party and the entire Barbados Labour Party for the first time after 24 downgrades, after 10 lost years, to now move ourselves from selective default to investment status. And I'm saying today that deserves, Mr. Speaker, a pat on the back and a round of applause. Mr. Speaker, we had near Sears in the other August chamber, in particular, who call it the Ernie and Bert show, and they liken it to a Sesame Street episode. But I know that, Mr. Speaker, when you point your finger, sometimes the thumb points back at you, because if the Barbados Labour Party and this government had the BERT, which is the acronym for the Barbados Economic Recovery and Transformational Project and Program, if we had the BERT, Mr. Speaker, I would have to ask who the Ernie is. But Mr. Speaker, more importantly, Ernie is an acronym as well, because the E can mean empty, the R, Mr. Speaker, can mean ridiculous, Mr. Speaker, the N can mean nonsensical, Mr. Speaker, the I can show the level of ignorance, and Mr. Speaker, the E again is erroneous. So we understand what Ernie means as well. Mr. Speaker, as part of our 2018 manifesto, we made a pledge, and the pledge is to build the best of Barbados together. Mr. Speaker, I will repeat. We made a pledge to the country to build the best of Barbados together. And the old maxim comes to mind, because if you walk in front, I may not follow, Mr. Speaker. If you walk behind, I may not lead. But if you walk by my side, we can achieve anything together, Mr. Speaker. And I am saying that this Barbados Labour Party, as the Prime Minister, the Right Honourable Member for St. Michael North, he said, give me the vote and watch us. And today I'm saying, not only are we bringing resolutions to transform this country, but the international community, today, the international community has recognized that Barbados is on the move in an economical way that has never been seen in the last 10 years. And Mr. Speaker, when you talk about development, land development, housing development, you are talking, Mr. Speaker, about sustainable development. The conversation cannot only extend to building a house. And there are two components you have to look at: the infrastructure development, transportation needs, Mr. Speaker, utilities, Mr. Speaker, street lights, internet access, waste disposal. Those are the infrastructure development that you have to look at, Mr. Speaker. But more importantly, sustainable development. Because any question or any decision that is made as it relates to developing housing units, developing land, Mr. Speaker, must have a conversation as it relates to development of people, along with protecting the society, along with protecting the economy, along with protecting the ecosystems, Mr. Speaker. And I'm saying, Mr. Speaker, that one must recognize the 5 Ps when you look at sustainable development. It must be people-centered, because people must form the important cog in the development of any plan, any policy. There must be partnerships that involve other persons in society, other groups in society, Mr. Speaker, partnerships that involve global entities. And that is what sustainable development is about. There must be, Mr. Speaker, a conversation as it relates to prosperity, and recognizing that prosperity goes 2 ways. It speaks about the land being prosperous, Mr. Speaker, or how you invest in it, and it speaks to the people that live on that property being prosperous. And Mr. Speaker, there must also be a conversation, most importantly, about the planet. And this government has moved post-haste to ensure that we put regulations and laws in place to protect our planet and our country, Barbados. There's now more than ever a conversation as it relates to the green economy. And the fact that we must treat to our ecosystems in such a way that by 2030, the threat of carbon dioxide as it relates to the interference of our ozone, that threat will be null and void. That is the sort of conversation that we must have in this country. We must have a conversation about renewable energy and how we can reduce our fossil fuel. That is the conversation. And that is the conversation that development and sustainable development must have. And Mr. Speaker, you must also have a conversation as it relates to littering in this country. And any developmental plan we have, we must look at waste disposal. Whether it is waste disposal as it looks at our solid waste and the management of our solid waste. Because I believe every single housing policy or housing resolution that comes before this August chamber should seek to have a waste disposal unit. And every project that we do in Barbados, how we recycle our waste, how we use it, whether we use it in its tertiary, in a tertiary sense, as it relates to a plant that recognizes that we can utilize that same water for agriculture purposes, Mr. Speaker, for flushing the toilets, Mr. Speaker, or recognizing that gas produced, like methane, can be used for a source of alternative source of energy. That is the kind of conversation we need to have. We need to look at circular Barbados, and how we use every single thing that persons consider waste to the best of our ability and for its full potential. And that is the conversation we need to have if we are going to talk about sustainable development, if we are going to talk about maximizing our potential as a small developing country. And I'm saying, Mr. Speaker, on the current trajectory, this government is on the right path as it relates to sustainable development, as it relates to the economy, as it relates to the ecosystems. And I'm saying, Mr. Speaker, there must be a bigger conversation as well. We must have a conversation, Mr. Speaker, to the little children in this country. And I, as Minister of Youth, I'm making a clarion call today for young persons to get involved in the fight to keep Barbados clean. And the fight as it relates to the separation of garbage. And we have all types of devices. Every single school child in this country from class 3 can talk about a tablet. I made a speech the other day, Mr. Speaker, and I said the only tablet I knew when I was growing up is a Panadol or Frenzy always. But now you have a device that can tell you with a touch of a button what is happening in the tenosphere, Mr. Speaker. We have technology that we must appreciate. And with the visionary leadership of this government, we have a Prime Minister that recognizes that technology must be fully maximized, and that's why we came up with Smart Barbados, which is going to be rolled out in the next couple of months. Finding employment opportunities for people. And when you talk about sustainable development, development of housing units, development of plans, land development, you have to talk about the development of people because there must be synergies. They don't operate in silos, Mr. Speaker, sir. So the conversation must entail how are we going to develop our people. And another conversation we must have is how we are going to utilize our land space, our horizontal land space. Gone are the days where we can just have plans that we see flat buildings. We must recognize that in order to maximize our space in this new era, there must be vertical buildings where we go up rather than going across, where we utilize our land mass so that additional land will be allocated for landscaping, for gardening. I remember we had a Prime Minister who said that Barbadians have to learn to feed themselves. And I'm saying, Mr. Speaker, that is the message we must send. We can't develop a housing project without having gardening, and whether it's backyard gardening or specific areas for gardening. I am saying that there must be community gardening as well. I go a step further. We must have land allocated in our housing development for community gardening, where the community is able to get all the vegetables and fruits if possible, Mr. Speaker. That is the sort of conversation we need to have. And Mr. Speaker, we need, led by the young people in this country, of course, we need to start to separate our garbage, where we can utilize different parts of the garbage for different purposes. And that's the conversation we need to have. We need to encourage every Barbadian to play their part, because Barbados belongs to all of we. And if we don't care it, it will be Barbados no more. And I'm saying, Mr. Speaker, that a conversation that involves housing development must also involve the most vulnerable. The most vulnerable in this country are the young people. Whether it's play parks, Mr. Speaker, whether it's having adequate school bus services, Mr. Speaker, whether it is the conversation as it relates to community libraries. This is the vision that we must have if we are going to develop our country. And I'm saying, Mr. Speaker, that how you treat those at the other end of the spectrum, the elderly. Every single housing unit, housing project, Mr. Speaker, should have a home for the elderly in this country. And it must be fit for, when I say fit for purpose, and I see the Member of Parliament, the Minister for the Elderly, for St. Thomas shaking her head. But she knows what it's saying is true. It's how we treat our elderly. We treat you good. We treat you good, the Honourables. But that is the type of conversation we must have. And how we treat the disabled community. Because we cannot have a housing project in this country unless we involve the disabled community. And we have buildings, and toilet facilities that recognize that disabled persons are people too. And they need to use the facilities like everybody else in this country. And I'm saying any housing project in Barbados must seek to undertake the disabled community and the input of the disabled community. And Mr. Speaker, sir, I am going to say without apologies that I'm very dissatisfied within the last 10 years that the disabled, the unit, is still the same place that it is, where persons have great difficulty, Mr. Speaker, accessing their home, the unit. And the Member of Parliament for St. Thomas can attest to what I'm saying. If we are talking about developing our country, we cannot develop our country unless we develop our people. That would be the politics of imagination. We don't practice that in this Barbados Labour Party, Mr. Speaker. I am saying that a development, Mr. Speaker, and I am backing up a plea to the Member of Parliament for St. Andrew, the Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, I, as a young Member of Parliament and Minister, I had the experience of a number of house fires in my constituency. And Mr. Speaker, I am saying and begging the Member of Parliament for St. Andrew, the Right Honourable Minister for Housing and Lands, that every single housing project that comes to this August chamber should have at least 5 or 6 units allocated for fires and other emergencies, tragedies, so that persons can be accommodated as soon as these events happen. Because, Mr. Speaker, today it is me, tomorrow it may be you. And I'm saying this is something that has affected me personally, Mr. Speaker. And I am saying that any housing unit, it goes back to my point, any housing unit that is serious about developing Barbados must have a conversation about developing people. And one can only look at persons as you see them in despair after a tragedy, and you feel and empathize with them, you understand the disruption of their lives. And I'm saying, Mr. Speaker, I know the Member of Parliament for St. Andrew is listening to me, a good listener. He's a good listener and a good learner. And he acts post haste, Mr. Speaker, and I'm thankful to be able to sit down in this August chamber with a gentleman, I won't say an old gentleman, but a gentleman a little older than me, the Minister of Youth. Mr. Speaker, I am making a plea also today on behalf of the residents of Christchurch West Central, my constituents, especially those that live in the housing area, who are pleading for assistance as it relates to the electrical charges. They call it the electric bug of running about in Christchurch. Not every single day they got some type of electrical problem. I am saying that the ministry has to move a dispatch to ensure, because again, the lives of Barbadians are threatened. And it goes back to my point. You cannot develop a country unless you develop people, unless you have people at the forefront of every single thing you do. And I am saying that the residents of Christchurch, especially Christchurch West Central, who live in housing areas, they are uncomfortable as I speak, because they are of the opinion that at any point in time, there can be an electrical fire. So, Mr. Speaker, as I said, the Member of Parliament for St. Andrew, he hears your cries, and I am certain that he will move to get something done about that area. But more importantly, Mr. Speaker, we have to develop this country, Mr. Speaker, in such a way that it is fit for purpose. We can't only look at housing projects like years gone by, where you just put 2 or 3 houses side by side, and because they call it matchbox, the matchbox scenario. But you know what? When you talk about matchbox, the next thing you talk about is matches and fire, because all 2 of them go hand in hand, and that's what has to be happening. When there are issues with fire, one can recognize why there are 2 and 3 houses being burnt at the same time, because they're too close, Mr. Speaker. These houses don't allow breathing space. And I'm saying that any housing project that is serious about developing people must recognize that there must be space for recreational purposes. Persons must feel excited about going out on evenings on their lawns, Mr. Speaker. They must feel like that the house is a home, and they can wash and put their lily whites. A member of this August chamber last night talked about putting his lily whites on crust grass. But the people in Barbados that live in these housing projects must be able to feel a sense of empowerment, and that is what this government is about. We must empower people every step of the way. And Mr. Speaker, we have had conversations about the way we do business as it relates to transporting our people. And I'm saying our transportation issues, we must tackle them, because when you talk about developing houses, you have to look at access to transportation. And I'm saying today that it makes no sense putting a house where persons will have difficulty moving from one place of the country to another. And I'm saying, Mr. Speaker, that we must have a conversation as it relates to our transportation and our transportational problems in Barbados. And I know that the persons in rural Barbados, and my mother, as she's in listening here, she would attest that there's a lot of difficulty getting from St. Andrew when the days come. And I know the Member of Parliament for Christchurch West, my brother, he is working assiduously to ensure that this bus problem is faced. Mr. Speaker, when we talk about sustainable development, when we talk about housing projects, we must also recognize the needs of the ladies and the women in this country. Oftentimes, you hear women complain that their basic needs are not attended to. And we are not a misogynistic government. We are inclusive, we look after every single person. I am saying that when I stand and hear my mother and the Member of Parliament for St. Thomas could attest, when you hear her complaining about the lack of water, a basic need, Mr. Speaker, we can't talk about development without talking about development of basic needs and the most vulnerable, and how we treat to the most vulnerable in this country, and the basic needs. The moral test of any government, next 20, 30 years, is how you treat your most vulnerable, and how you are able to respond to the basic needs of our citizens. And I'm saying, Mr. Speaker, this government is going to pass that litmus test with flying colors. We are going to stay the course. We understand that it's a difficult period, Mr. Speaker, but the reality is that we inherit this problem. When we came to government, we always hear the saying that you campaign in poetry but govern in prose. We never understood that it was this bad, Mr. Speaker. We were at the bottom of the socio-economic and political chasm. That is where we were, Mr. Speaker. We are now putting plans and projects in place to bring light at the end of the tunnel, Mr. Speaker. We are now encouraging Barbadians to carry their candle and light up the world, because the world awaits them under this government and this Barbados Labour Party. And we are going to ensure that every step of the way we develop people and we respond to their needs. And when you're talking about housing projects across Barbados, Mr. Speaker, that is exactly what this Barbados Labour Party is going to do. That's what we said in our manifesto. And Mr. Speaker, in closing, a promise made is a promise kept. And I want to say, and I want to close, Mr. Speaker, in the words of the American socialist, William Dubois, when he says, to be a poor man is hard. And I repeat, Mr. Speaker, to be a poor man is hard. But to be a poor race in a land of dollars is the very bottom of hardship. I repeat, Mr. Speaker, to be a poor man is hard. But to be a poor race in a land of dollars is the very bottom of hardship. Mr. Speaker, I'm obliged.
The honourable member for St. Michael Northwest.
Mr. Speaker, sir. I should go. I rise to give my support to this debate on the vesting of land for housing. You and I know, sir, that the demand for housing in this country, sir, surpass the supply by the National Housing Corporation. And like the Honourable Member for St. Andrew stated in his presentation on October 26, that the alarming number of applicants remaining on the waiting list is over 30,000 applications at NHC. And without a doubt, sir, I know that a portion or a significant number of those applications are people living in my constituency who are fighting hard to acquire their own housing. And sir, you and I know that there are plenty of situations where persons, and the member for St. Michael South mentioned it earlier in his presentation, we have landlords renting rotten houses to tenants, and a lot of these houses still have outdoor toilet facility. And sir, yes, I can honestly say that I have a few families within my constituency, especially in Brandon's and parts of Freehill, that are renting wooden houses that are in very bad condition and still have outdoor toilet facility. And there are also situations where we have 2- and 3-bedroom houses where there are 7 or more families living in these houses. And such situation, sir, reminded me when I was a boy growing up in Brighton, Blackrock, living in a 3-bedroom wooden house with outdoor toilet facility and having 11 relatives living in one house. Sir, could you imagine in this day and age, we still have families living in such situations that I experienced as a boy growing up? And I think, sir, that these are challenges that are not only existing within my constituency, but I am sure that these challenges are existing across Barbados and in other constituencies besides mine. And these are challenges, sir, that the National Housing and this government will address. And under the last administration, sir, under the 20-year program, we have families that remain without their title deeds in some of these units, especially the residents living in Ferniehurst, Rosemont, Deacon's Farm, and Golden Acre. And we also have some of these families complaining about the electrical issues that they're experiencing in some of these housing units, Mr. Speaker, sir. And I trust and I am confident that the Minister of Housing will address these issues accordingly. Mr. Speaker, sir, housing development is critical in this country. In order to give poor people a shelter and a roof over their heads. And I want the honourable member for St. Andrew, the Minister of Housing, to tour St. Michael Northwest, because I can attest that there is Crown land in that constituency that can be used for future housing development, Mr. Speaker, sir. So I give you the opportunity, along with your colleague, the member for St. Lucie, to tour the area with me so that I could point out these lands belonging to the Crown for future housing development. And I wish to also support the words echoed by the honourable member for St. Michael East, when she said that St. Michael Southeast, sorry, when she said that it is immoral for women to back the earth and face the sun for housing or to get housing in this country under any government. And I do support her when she said that, because when the member for St. Andrew toured some of these housing units, and it was stated to him that these houses were obtained under the previous government, under the directive of other ministers, and they were given these houses and were told that they don't have to pay any rent. And situations like these, sir, are very unbelievable. And nothing don't come for free under certain circumstances, sir. And it's unfortunate as well when we have tenants that owe the government thousands of dollars, and because of this, it forced the NHC, sir, to operate on limited resources. And because of limited resources, sir, It also creates problems with national housing being able to maintain the housing unit still owned by the government. And Mr. Speaker, sir, I believe that the time is upon us where salary deductions should be mandatory for all persons occupying housing units. And the reason I said that, sir, it would secure the resources that will be obtained or earned by the National Housing Corporation. And, Mr. Speaker, sir, I know that once that we earn the necessary resources, it will give the NHC the power to do more for those persons that are still on the waiting list trying to acquire housing in this country. And I know, sir, that we are not a perfect government, but I know, sir, that we are focused. I know, Mr. Speaker, sir, we are not a perfect government, but I know that we are a government that cares. And it is a must, sir. It is a must, sir, and very important, sir, that people in this country who already own land or house on land should never be given the opportunity to buy land or house on land from the government. And the reason that I said that, sir, people that already own house on land or land deprive those persons that can't afford to go and buy land privately from a private vendor because of the expensive costs that the private vendor may have their property going for, because there are some situations, sir, that a property may value $150,000, and we have people that are asking $250,000 for a property that only value $150,000. I just cannot get that part understand. And that is my main reason, sir, that I don't think that it's fair that persons who already own land should be given the opportunity to buy land through the government. I think that the government should use whatever land or resources it have to really benefit the poor people in this country, especially those that cannot afford to buy the expensive properties. And I could use the restaurant at the bottom of Orange Hill as a perfect example, and that was land that was taken from poor people and given to the rich under the last government. And those things should never happen under any government, especially a government that people, or claim, especially a government that claim that it used to have the interests of poor people at heart. Could never be doing such things, sir, Mr. Speaker, sir. And one thing that I want us to pay close attention to as well, we must control how developers benefit from agricultural land through the government of Barbados, especially for housing development, Mr. Speaker, sir. I believe that the National Housing Corporation and poor people should really benefit from land, agricultural land, that developers take and apply for usage for housing development. And they believe that any person or company that wants to use agricultural land for housing development or have intentions to use lands for such purposes, sir, they should have no choice but to develop affordable housing for poor people in this country. Because, Mr. Speaker, sir, these housing developers make or earn millions of dollars from using agricultural land for housing development in this country, but the government of Barbados do not gain from the millions of dollars earned through taking these lands for housing development. And the taxpayers of this country, sir, do not benefit either, because when these developers put a price tag on these houses, only the middle class or high earning income owners can benefit from these houses, sir. So I think it is very important that we pay close attention to such, sir. And I want to say that we should put measures in place to control things like that from happening, because national housing is in crisis in being able to supply adequate housing to sustain or to support the demand of the 30,000 plus applications or applicants that are requesting housing. And I think we need to put a policy in place that going forward, when persons want to use agricultural land for such purposes, that the National Housing Corporation and the government of Barbados and the poor people and the taxpayers should benefit from such a project. And in conclusion, sir, and I want to leave this quote with the Honourable Member for St. Andrew, Proverbs 19, verse 17. Whoever is generous to the poor lends to the Lord, and he will repay him for his deed. And I want you to continue, sir, doing the good work that you are doing over at the National Housing Corporation, along with the member for St. Lucie, sir, and I oblige to you.
Mr. Speaker, sir, I beg to move that this sitting be suspended until 2:30 today.
Question is that this honorable chamber be suspended until 2:30 today. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. I think the ayes have it. This chamber is suspended until 2:30 in the PM.